4 years in jail for Jeffrey Archer, the liar and the cheat. His last minutes of freedom today on his way to face the jury at the Old Bailey. Tonight he's in prison. Lawyers say he'll appeal against the convictions.
Half the members of the House of Lords clock in and out of Parliament for a few minutes a day in order to claim a £300 daily attendance allowance. That's the allegation made by disgraced peer Lord Hanningfield, a member of Parliament's upper chamber. He made the claim in response to revelations that he had been signing into work at Parliament for only a few minutes a day. Hanningfield, real name Paul White, was convicted as part of the investigation into the parliamentary expenses scandal of 2009 and spent 9 weeks of a 9-month sentence in jail.
Lord Taylor of Warwick arrives at court, where he was jailed for 12 months for fiddling his parliamentary expenses. The disgraced former Tory peer falsely claimed more than £11,000 for travel and overnight subsistence. He told the House of Lords Members' Expenses Office that his main residence was a house in Oxford, when in fact he lived in West London. Passing sentence, Mr Justice Saunders said Lord Taylor had lied to journalists investigating his expenses and lied while giving evidence to the jury under oath during his trial.
Ahmed has been jailed for 12 weeks for dangerous driving after sending and reading text messages at the wheel before a fatal accident. He had pleaded guilty to dangerous driving on the southbound carriageway of the M1 near Rotherham on Christmas Day in 2007. Well, Chris Buckler is at Sheffield Crown Court now. Chris.
Lord Ahmed was not responsible for causing the death of the man who died in that accident on the M1. However, during a subsequent police investigation, it was found that he had been using his mobile phone in the minutes beforehand while driving.
For an investigation into their expenses, a Lords committee found that Labour peers Baroness Udin and Lord Paul and crossbencher Lord Bhatia had wrongly claimed tens of thousands of pounds between them. Our deputy political editor, James Landale, is at the House of Lords. So, James, what exactly did they do and what happens to them now?
Well, George, members of the House of Lords here are supposed to act on their honour, but a committee of peers has today found that 3 of their number unequivocally broke the rules on their expenses. They wrongly claimed for subsistence and travel expenses worth almost £200,000, and they did this by wrongly claiming that flats and houses outside of London were their main residences, and they hardly ever went there. Now,
it would have to be a fitness to plead. Ordinarily, and where we're really keen to make sure, and we do go through fitness to plead proceedings, is where at the end of the day someone's still a threat to the public, there's still damage, and therefore we need a hospital order or a supervision order. That wasn't the case here, so it was going to be an absolute discharge, so no penalty, no conviction, and there still is unlikely to be, even though we're prosecuting now.
That's Alison Saunders, the Director of Public Prosecutions, talking to Clive Coleman on the news that her original decision not to prosecute the former Labour peer Lord Janner on historical child sexual offences has been overturned.
Tomorrow, one of Britain's best-known businessmen goes on trial in Chicago for racketeering and criminal fraud.
In this grim, monolithic building, the full weight of US justice is about to bear down on Conrad Black.
A flamboyant and controversial media mogul, Conrad Black's empire stretched from the Daily Telegraph halfway round the world. A man with an appetite for the billionaire lifestyle.
He certainly liked the money, and the more of it he got, the more of it he wanted. It was a little bit like a cocaine addiction, I guess.
With his wife, Barbara Emile, Lord Black was the talk of the town.
I mean, they were made for each other. She had her tongue hanging out for wealth, just like Conrad had his tongue hanging out for sex.
The former Home Secretary, Leon Britton, who'd faced allegations of improper conduct in office, has died.
Pay tribute to him as a former member of this House and former Home Secretary, and he was a kind, assiduous and brilliant man.
He was a dedicated public servant. He served his country in Europe, but I think perhaps most of all he was part of that Margaret Thatcher government that did so much to turn our country round in the 1980s, and he played a key role in that.
We are seen by millions of people as the only party truly willing to stand up to the men of violence, the terrorist, the thug, the child molester.
The biggest developments were revealed in the Sunday People by that newspaper and Mark Watson, his colleagues at Exeter Road News, and they include or involve Leon Britton being actually named as an abuser by one of the witnesses we've heard from on this programme, the key witness, Nick, who has been described by police as credible. Mark Watts is with me now. So you knew this, obviously. You knew that Nick, because he was talking to you when he made these accusations. I suppose I have to begin by asking why they didn't come out before Leon Britton died.
Once a certain stage is reached, then naming is okay. And so we're all waiting for a property to be raided, for him to be talked to under caution, to be arrested, all of which happened in those other high-profile cases at the point when they were named. And in fact, in some cases, they still weren't named even at that point. Now, that's why with Britton, it's particularly interesting. When we did the story last year about the rape claim, the claim that he raped a 19-year-old woman who we called Jane in 1967, before he was an MP, the police at the time, of course things have changed a lot since then, but at the time were avoiding questioning him over those allegations. And the reason they were avoiding questioning him was that they would know that once the question was put to them, they'd have to confirm that they'd done so and his name would be out.
First Conservative Party donors was apparently to go upstairs for dinner with Dave and Sam. Mr Cameron insists these dinners were private and with friends and were not about fundraising. Among the so-called Premier Leaguers is the City businessman Michael Spencer, who gave the Conservatives £3.6 million. Financier Michael Farmer, who gave the party £3.3 million. And the chairman of JCB, Sir Anthony Bamford, who was given £1.8 million.
And I'm proud of it. And do you know how I've promised, Chatham House rules, no journalist. And so therefore, to that extent, I can balance both sides of that argument. So I remain a proud tax avoider.
All of this sounds terribly, terribly familiar. Remember Tony Blair and cash for honours? That ended up in a £1.5 million police investigation and no prosecutions.
Former Labour minister once said scandals make good headlines. His front page story comes at a time when David Cameron is set to appoint dozens of new peers. But has this changed the public view of our second chamber?
I think we shouldn't have a House of Lords. I think we should have a House of Representatives. I think it should be elected, don't you? It's bonkers.
I would be quite happy to see it seriously challenged and to be made a lot more fit for purpose. Whether David Cameron would be the right person to be doing that, I don't know.
To be honest, I think he should step down. But I don't think it's going to happen because he's a Lord.
So you're resigned to it?
Yeah, I am.
He will want to avoid the spotlight, but it will be hard to escape. Tonight, the Met Police has launched a criminal investigation and searched his flat.
Meg Russell, people are bound to ask, and you could see the ordinary members of the public there, whether the House of Lords doesn't need wholesale reform.
Well, it brings us on to the topic of reform, and reform, as Sal Brinton has just said, has been on the agenda for years, and it's always welcome to talk about it. It doesn't move very fast, and maybe this will give it a bit of a push.
Let's talk first about David Cameron's determination to put a whole lot more unelected people into the House. Do you think he's going to be able to do that now?
Well, I don't know. I mean, he's withstood an awful lot of criticism on his appointments so far. In my view, the worst problem with the House of Lords that needs tackling really urgently now is the completely unregulated powers of patronage that the Prime Minister has. Since the coalition came to power, the size of the House of Lords has already grown by more than 100. And we're now looking at potentially another 30, another 50 appointments. There's no control at all on how many Cameron can put in and the share between them, between the parties. So that's the urgent thing. And then I think we move on to the next stuff.
But for you, I don't think it's enough, is it? I mean, don't you want the wholesale?
Absolutely, we do want wholesale reform.
Well, that means scrapping it.
Whether we scrap it or we reform it completely, my party's view is that it should be like a Senate, where people are elected probably on a regional basis, so that they have to face the electorate on a regular basis. Unfortunately, the problem with the sticking plasters of the changes, with people being allowed to retire if they wish, means that the House continues to expand. There are more members active over the age of 90 than there are under 40, and the numbers just keep going up, and it causes a serious problem.
But the truth is, and the Constitutional Unit has been at this for many, many years, tinkering around has proved that it actually fundamentally never changes.
Well, Lords reform, I've been working in this field for more than 15 years now. Lords reform is extremely difficult to achieve. We've had one significant reform, which was the Labour Party's removal of the bulk of hereditary peers 16 years ago now. We've been talking about it ever since. Prior to that, we've been talking about it for a century. That reform at the time was seen as quite a small, piecemeal, temporary solution, and we've been living with it for 16 years. So what I've been saying recently is the big reform is very difficult. We may be on a long road to big reform, but we should seize the small reforms where we can and ask ourselves what's the next most urgent thing that needs doing, and I think it's getting a grip on prime ministerial appointments.
Well, I mean, isn't the problem that there's enough alienation already from Westminster? The longer you leave it, the more it festers, the more it's filled with unacceptable individuals.
Absolutely, that's absolutely right. And the other problem is that without wholesale reform, there have been attempts in the last 5 years in the coalition government. There was an attempt to try and satisfy everyone, and it completely failed, not least because Labour and Conservative MPs didn't want the change. Why? Because many of them hoped to end up in the Lords in their retirement. That's why the patronage has got to stop, and we have to make sure that our second chamber is fully accountable and elected by the people of this country.
I think we can agree on the patronage needs to stop. I mean, several years ago, I called for a moratorium on new Lords appointments until there was some agreement on what the next stage should be. But the head of government can control how many people sit in there. He can put more people in on his own side. That's just crazy in the 21st century.
Baroness Brenton and Professor Russell, thank you very much indeed for coming.
At 7:30 this morning, the peer, who is the subject of a police investigation after being accused of taking drugs with prostitutes, resigned from the House of Lords. In a statement, Lord Sewell says this: "I have today written to the Clerk of the Parliament terminating my membership of the House of Lords. The question of whether my behaviour breached the Code of Conduct is important, but essentially technical. The bigger questions are whether my behaviour is compatible with membership of the House of Lords, and whether my continued membership would damage and undermine public confidence in the House of Lords. I believe the answer to both these questions means that I can best serve the House by leaving it. As a subordinate second chamber, the House of Lords is an effective, vital, but undervalued part of our political system. I hope my decision will limit and help repair the damage I've done to an institution I hold dear. Finally, I want to apologise for the pain and embarrassment I have caused." Well, as a result of his actions, some of you have been asking what is the point of the House of Lords. In a moment, 4 peers and an audience of viewers will debate reform and abolition, and whether Lord Sewell's apology and resignation is enough or too late. First, Norman Smith has the facts and figures.
Welcome to the longest-running parliamentary show in town, House of Lords Reform. It's been running on and off for more than 100 years. So, what do you need to know about the House of Lords? Well, let's start with their lordships and ladyships. Well, there are just under 800 of them, of which around a quarter are women. Most of the Lords have been appointed as life peers, but almost 90 are still classed as hereditary peers. How much do they cost? Well, most don't get salaries, but they can get around £300 a day for turning up, with the total cost of the Lords running to nearly £90 million. It was Lloyd George who first got the ball rolling on House of Lords reform, but it was another Liberal leader who had the latest attempt, Nick Clegg. But his efforts, predictably enough, like pretty much every other effort, ended in total defeat and disarray. So, what was in the Clegg package of reforms for the House of Lords? Well, he wanted to cut the number of peers in half to 450. He wanted to ensure 80% of them were elected, and he wanted to bar peers from serving more than 15 years. But will this latest controversy spark renewed calls for reform?
With every member of the House of Lords entitled to £300 a day tax-free just for showing up, that puts the cost per peer at £118,000. This is a lot of money, and with more appointments on the way, more political appointments on the way, that means a lot more taxpayers' money being spent on people who are not accountable back to those taxpayers. And what it really means is that for all the good work that the House of Lords does do, it's undermined by the size and the cost, which is now just out of control.
So, what chance of one more go at reforming this place? Well, Don't hold your breath. In his manifesto, Mr. Cameron says it's not a priority, but anyway, he's got a hulking great deficit to deal with. He's got an EU referendum. He's got the Scottish National Party breathing down his neck. Why would he want to risk a bloody nose on an issue which most politicians believe voters just don't care about?
Also with us today, 4 peers to discuss what should happen to the House of Lords and ultimately their jobs. We've got we've got Lord Elton, who is a hereditary peer from the Conservative Party. His family has been represented in Parliament since 1934. Congratulations. I feel like I should say congratulations for that. Thank you very much for coming on the programme. Also, Baroness Shrila Flather, who is a Conservative, the first Asian woman to receive a peerage.
Excuse me, I'm now a crossbencher.
Crossbencher, fair enough.
I was Conservative.
Yes, and you know Lord Sewell pretty well.
Well, you know, not a personal friend.
What do you think of his resignation this morning?
I think he should have done it straight away. As soon as the things came out, he should have done it, because even waiting 2 days has done him no good, done us no good.
Also with us, we've got Baroness Jenny Jones, a Green Party peer elected in 2013. Hello to you. And at Westminster, Lord Lipsey, who was created a life peer in 1999. He's from the Labour Party. And you, too, are a colleague of Lord Sewell. Tell our audience what he's like.
Well, he's a sociable and affable man. I think he did a rather good job as chairman of committees, but obviously you can't go around dabbling in Class A drugs. And
well, that's the allegation, anyway.
That's the allegation, which he hasn't denied, I don't think.
But it's for the police to investigate. Baroness Jenny Jones, the resignation this morning and the statement, the pain, the embarrassment he said he's caused, and hopes by going now he won't have done too much damage to your institution. What do you think?
I think that he's shown some dignity, and I thought the letter was extremely well written. I think he, yes, should have done it 24 hours sooner. But if he stimulated a debate on the function and the role of the House of Lords, I think it's...
Yeah, but I'm sure he didn't want... He didn't.
No, it wasn't his intention.
It wasn't a means to the end.
No.
You know, the sort of the gatherings in the Dolphin Square flat.
He was clearly just having a good time, and you know, wasn't thinking about perhaps his role in the House of Lords.
Right. Sorry, I just heard you say poor man.
No, I said, Jenny said that he was thinking about having a good time. So I said rather sarcastically, poor man. not feeling sorry for him.
Fair enough, I understand. Lord Elton, what's your reaction to this resignation of Lord Sewell?
My reaction is that I quite understand why it didn't come at once. The man is probably facing prosecution. A resignation would be an indication to a jury, I would have thought, of his sense possibly of guilt, and he would not want to influence the outcome of the trial. But we're not concerned with that today. We're actually concerned with the House and how it survives from this and what better service it can give to the country. OK,
well, Janet is one of the viewers. Janet's from Suffolk, who wanted us to talk about this, prompted by the Sewell scandal. Or Lord Sewer, as one newspaper is calling it this morning. Janet, what do you think we should be discussing and why?
Oh, good morning.
Morning.
I think, first of all, can I just say that I think that the Lord Sewell saga has acted as a catalyst, really. And my view is that it's focused our attention upon the discussion around the role, the accountability and the responsibilities of the House of Lords. And it's essentially an undemocratic part of our constitution. And in a country that prides itself in being the forebearer and the forefront of democracy, the very undemocratic nature of it requires, I think now, a really serious discussion and debate and thinking about how best to actually implement an upper house.
OK, well, let's bring in Lord Elton then, because as an hereditary peer, how would you answer what Janet is saying, particularly the unelected element, the fact that you are there because your parents were there, your dad was there, and his dad, and so on and so forth?
I'm not here to defend the hereditary system, but I am here to defend an essential part of the Constitution, which is a second chamber which can't be got hold of and controlled by government. And one of the ways in which government can exercise extreme pressure on a chamber of parliament is by preventing them standing again for election. In other words, they can sack the elected people by preventing them being re-elected. The other thing is, of course, that we are now paid, which I very much enjoy, but I slightly regret, because when I joined the House, it was some years before I discovered I could get £5 a week towards my stationery, and that's what we got, apart from travel. We have become more expensive, that's a pity. But the basic thing is you want a House that can restrain the other place from its extreme follies when it falls into them, which is very rarely, but I got two examples. And the other is to make sure that no government can seize all the reins of power in the country and silence the people, which is what eventually would happen.
OK, well, let's hear voters here and taxpayers and talk to all the peers that are with us today. Do introduce yourself.
My name is Evadne Campbell and I run a small PR and media training company. I hear what you're saying, but the point is the majority of the peers, the Lords, have been nominated, which means the political parties are nominating. You cannot therefore then say that they can hold the government to account when there is a possibility that there could be a mismatch in who gets nominated. I really think that, you sound as if you are there and would do the right thing in terms of for the public and be representing the public. But the reality is, whilst we have the majority that are still being nominated by the political parties, there is a risk that the people that are being nominated aren't necessarily representing us and will not hold the government to account anyway.
You can come back on that, but I'm just wondering if it would be more pertinent if somebody who had been nominated by their own political party, like Baroness Father or Baroness Jones or Lord Lipsey, would respond to that?
I have every sympathy with the fact that the House of Lords is unrepresentative. Only, less than a third women.
It's about the political
5%.
nominations.
Yes,
the political
absolutely.
appointees.
And I've got every sympathy with its being undemocratic. But in fact, once you're in the House of Lords, there is a very light whip. And people do actually speak up.
Will you explain what that means?
In the House of Commons, for example, the whip is rather heavy, that MPs are instructed by their parties how to vote. But in the House of Lords, basically you can't be got rid of, and so people tend to speak with their consciences, and it is, in fact, a more liberal place than you might expect.
OK. What would you say?
Yeah. First of all, I'm sorry, I can't tell you.
No, that's all right. We can hear you.
Is that we have nearly as many crossbenchers as we have party members.
And just explain what that means for those who want to learn more.
Crossbenchers are those people who are not aligned to any political party. I'm a crossbencher. There are nearly 200 crossbenchers, and we're not aligned to any party. So,
well, on paper you're not, but I mean, you come from a political.
No. I'm sorry. Why do we become crossbenchers? Because we don't wish to be aligned to a party. Why would we go to crossbenchers if we want to be aligned to a party? Because we have more privileges if we're aligned to a party.
So, if everybody was a crossbencher, would that be all right with you, Evadne?
I still think that whilst we have a system where they're being nominated by a government that doesn't necessarily reflect the public anyway, it's difficult to change the makeup of the Lords if you don't have. I just think there needs to be a mixture of, I don't know how the reform should take place, but
you're accepting there should be a House of Lords?
Yes, I do. I do think that.
I mean, we're the only. Sorry, I'm Cam. I'm training to be a doctor, so I'm going to be working in the NHS, and there are actually quite a few doctors in the Lords. But when you look at the makeup of the Lords, only 1% of the people in there are from trades. You know, they're people who represent the majority of the workers in this country. And we've had so many obvious examples of people paying their way into peerages, and so many peers also have vested financial interests in the decisions that they're making, for example, privatisation of the NHS. So how can we have a completely unaccountable system, the only country in Europe to have unelected upper house? How can we have a completely unaccountable system where people can profit from their decision making and can essentially pay their way in if they're rich?
Lord Elton.
Can I take it up from there and from what Serena Flather has just said? I was the minister taking the bill through the House of Lords with great difficulty to abolish the GLC.
Greater London Council.
1985. And during that debate, our chief whip told me that we were getting 1/3 of the crossbenchers were voting pretty consistently with the opposition, 1/3 pretty consistently with the others, with us, and the remainder were making up their minds on every decision.
Right.
And the proportions change in the crossbench vote according to what the issues are. They are genuinely independent, and they are generally feared and respected by ministers when they have to take policy.
But who are you
forward.
accountable to?
I beg your pardon?
Who are you accountable to? Let me ask Lord Lipsey. I don't want to leave him out. He's in our Westminster studio. To whom are you accountable?
Well, we're accountable to a very old-fashioned thing called the public good. You see, debates in the House of Lords are not partisan in the way they are in the House of Commons. To take the other drug story
just
that
a
has
minute, sorry,
if I could
what-
just
what-
finish, to take the other drug story that's been going on in the House of Lords over the last few weeks, the Lords have been working extremely hard with great expertise to try and make the government's legislation to ban legal highs workable. That's nothing to do with party politics. It's not to do with bought peerages. It's to do with a number of people who know a great deal about the subject trying to get the right answer for the country, and that seems to me to be a very valuable piece of our constitution.
And most people might agree with that point, but that phrase, the public good, what does that mean?
Well, it means that we all, on going to the Lords, take on a sacred duty to try and do our best to advance the public good as we see it. Of course, people slip from those standards from time to time. I'm sure it's absolutely true. Okay. Well, the members of the House of Commons, too, are entitled to do what they wish to do, but they're bound by a heavy party whip. As has been said, the whip in the House of Lords is very light. People feel quite prepared to abandon the whip when they think their party is in the wrong, as I've done on a largish number of occasions, to the anger of the whips, but there's absolutely nothing they can do about it.
So, I'm Aisha, I'm a lawyer, and there's been some talk about there being a light whip in the House of Lords. So for us as common people who probably don't know much about what happens in the House, how can you give the common man assurances that the process is transparent and accountable? And also, secondly, I'm sitting next to very honourably Lady Platter. Why aren't there more women in the House of Lords?
When I came into the House, which was in 1990, first of all, I was the only Asian there, and there were very few women. If you look at the change now, there are a lot more women. And not only that, but we have a woman leader of the Lords, and we also have had a woman chief whip who is now a Foreign Office minister. And basically, the women have much more important jobs, which they didn't have. So that is an improvement in that sense. And I think more women will keep coming, because don't forget that when you talk about minorities or you talk about women, you need a pool.
Yeah.
And sometimes the pool of minorities is not that big, or the pool of women is not that big. But it's surprising how many women are coming into the Lords and how effective they are. That is the key thing, is are they effective? Yes, they are effective. Can I just add something else that Lord Elton did not say? The hereditary peers have been elected by their own number. In a funny sort of way, they are more democratic than we are because we are not elected by anybody.
There are so many of you, and I think the average age of a peer is 70. There are some over the age of 90. You can earn up to £300 a day for just turning up, which some have. I'm not saying that's the vast majority at all, but some have. Jenny Jones, something has got to change, surely.
I don't think you will find many people who think that the House of Lords is right as it is now. Everybody agrees that there has to be reform. People want it fully elected or at least partially elected. My view is it should be fully elected. People want term limits and so on.
So fixed terms of 15 years or something, yes.
But it's the agreement on the detail that's going to be incredibly difficult.
Okay.
And it is time that we started that process, and much more loudly.
Quick thoughts from a couple of people, because we may interrupt for a speech by David Cameron in Singapore in a sec. Go ahead.
Ollie, studying politics at Brighton. I think it's more the bigger pictures. We say all these things that, the Lords understand what they're talking, and that they understand the whole complex processes behind it. But I think it's more like the ordinary people that say, we don't really know. I wouldn't say if you showed people pictures of you, I don't think most people would know who you are, no offence to any of you, but a lot of people wouldn't know who they are. And they don't know what they do, they don't know.
No, don't know what they do. I mean, that's the point that you raised, the transparency. Roddy, what would do you know enough about them? Is that part of the problem? We don't know enough.
I think anybody who wants to find out can find out. I regard myself as reasonably well informed, and I'm strongly against an elected House of Lords. We have an elected House of Commons. The House of Lords, as Lord Sewell said, is subordinate in legislative terms to the House of Commons. What I would like to see in the House of Lords, if we again have reform, is to turn it into a sort of Senate of the wise.
But that's what peers would say they have now.
Indeed. And so I think it only needs minor adjustments. I don't think it needs radical reform. And I certainly wouldn't want to change the fact that the average age is 70. That's great. Those are people of experience, expertise and wisdom.
But it's so unrepresentative, Roddy, isn't it?
I don't care.
Do you not?
No, I absolutely
If you were 32, would you care?
What about the millions of people who are being hit hardest by the cuts that this government are bringing in the House of Lords are doing nothing to
That's a matter for the House
people
of
who are
Commons.
under the age of 25.
We have a democratic parliament. We have a House of Commons. All the Lords do is advise and to ensure that the House of Commons is giving proper consideration. But it still goes back ultimately to the House of Commons.
Janet, quick final thought from you as you're listening to everybody this morning.
Well, if the role of the House of Lords is to advise, then why on earth do we need 790 members?
We don't.
And for one. And of course, none of you are going to turn around and say that you want the system to change. After all, you've got a vested interest in...
Well, to be fair, some of them do want the system to change, but it's, as Jenny Jones pointed out, it's just getting some kind of agreement. Tim has emailed to say, I fear that incidents like Lord Sewell's behaviour will further colour people's negative perceptions of the upper house to the extent that its valuable role as a checks and balancing mechanism is overlooked. Anthony on Facebook says there are too many of you. Far better, and even our peers agree.
Make a point on that. When I came into the house, and it was working extremely well, there were over 1,000. But the people didn't turn up except when they had something to say about something they knew about and knew other people would listen to. So the speeches were longer, the debates were shorter, and the quality was higher. And what I dread is having not only a large number of people, but a large number of people who think it's a full-time job. I came from being a farmer for 10 years, from being a teacher for 10 years, and I brought outside experience with me. And then when I succeeded to my father's title, I took a part-time job on a board of a large company and went abroad for it. And I brought all that back to the house. But the more it becomes full-time, the more we sit in the morning, the less we will know about the people who actually care and matter. And that's what I'm there for those people.
Thank you. Anthony on Facebook says there are too many of you. Far better to have 100 of them scrutinising proposed legislation and having to face election every 5 years. David says, to be a real democracy, we must have an elected second chamber. And Lawrence texts to say, it's time the House of Lords was shut down. It's a disgraceful waste of millions. Thank you all very much.